make it clear that they will not get another cent in subsidies and that any finance that supports them will never be counted towards the new goal. Excellencies, I have traveled far to be here. I have done so because I continue to believe that the Paris Agreement holds the key to my country's future and to our planet's survival. But SIDS' faith is wavering. Too many times, our voices have been pushed to the margins. We are therefore grateful to our hosts for convening this gathering. I urge you to continue to ensure our ministers and negotiators are centrally involved all the way through this conference. We are the ones on the front lines of climate change. We have developed global and local solutions. What remains is for the world to heed our leadership. Kumoltada, thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Your advocacy on environmental justice and climate resilience is an inspiration to us, but also to the young leaders who will be listening to us today, and we really thank you for that. We now turn to my dear brother, Prime Minister of Tonga and Chair of the Pacific Island Forum, who is a leader on climate finance and climate resilience and the need for stronger climate adaptation funding and more meaningful international partnerships to support small island states facing existential threats. And I welcome your statement, Honourable Prime Minister, from the big blue island state of Tonga.
President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, COP29 President, Secretary General of the Commonwealth Secretariat, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings from the Pacific, the Blue Continent. It is a pleasure to be here, and I want to express my deepest gratitude to the government and the people of Azerbaijan for their assistance and outstanding hospitality towards me, my team, and all SIDS delegates who traveled here. I would also like to offer my heartfelt congratulations, Mr. President, on taking the helm of this global platform. Achieving consensus among representatives from over 190 countries is a difficult task, particularly when dealing with vital issues. The Pacific faces challenges that go beyond mere importance. They directly impact life and death. Mr. President, I had the pleasure of hosting you in my country, Tonga, during the margin of the 53rd Pacific Forum Leaders Meeting. It was an opportunity to showcase the realities we face as a small island developing state and to highlight the urgent existential threat posed by climate change to our island nations. The severe and irreversible threats posed by climate change-related sea level rise will disproportionately impact the lives, the livelihoods, food security, ecosystem, and well-being of the people of the Blue Continent. As the UN Secretary General has so aptly stated, we are in the final countdown to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and time is not on our side. To address this urgent crisis, we, as Pacific small island developing states, have taken decisive action. We have established key declarations. For example, the 2023 Declaration on the Continuity of Statehood and Protection of Persons amid sea level rise, and the 2021 Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones against Climate Impacts. We have also developed and endorsed Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility and introduced a framework for resilient development in the Pacific. The latter is the world's first regional framework linking climate change and disaster risk. I'm currently the chair of the Pacific Island Forum, a forum with 18 member countries, each with unique challenges and strengths. Our unity is essential in navigating the complexity of climate change and ensuring our collective interests are prioritized. This is particularly important as we discuss ambitious and meaningful climate action. We must move forward together in a way that benefits all our member states. Some of the small island developing states are absent from COP29 as a protest against inaction on critical climate change action. Yes, we are frustrated, we are saddened. We can all sympathize as we have seen the disappointing outcomes of UNFCCC conferences in the past. However, we also understand without our presence, those with different views may shape outcomes that do not serve our interests. With the able leadership of COP29 presidency, we can unite and ensure that the outcomes of COP29 align with our priorities, including the new nationally determined contribution and the new collective quantified goal for climate finance, which must prioritize keeping the global temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you, our SIDS family, for your passion and commitment, also shown by the many late nights you have endured and will continue to go through to ensure our interests are well served. I also want to thank COP29 presidency for organizing this summit. We are ready to provide support as needed to ensure that COP29 outcomes reflect our priorities. In conclusion, I commend the leadership of Antigua and Barbuda, leading to the new 10-year program of action for small island developing states, DIAPAS. Samoa as chair of AOSIS, Vanuatu as chair of Pacific SIDS, and Grenada for chair of the Caribbean Community for their unwavering commitment to small island developing states. Thank you once again, Mr. President, for this opportunity. We are ready to support your presidency and ensure that COP29 delivers a meaningful outcome for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you for Tonga's leadership in climate action, particularly through hosting the Pacific Resilience Facility with a forward-looking target for securing $1.5 billion for a 1.5 degree future. It's a real testament to the urgency to act for SIDS, and we thank you for that leadership. I now turn, last but not least, to the Honourable Dickon Mitchell, the Prime Minister of Grenada and Chair of CARICOM. He has been a champion for regional solidarity, addressing climate change, economic development and disaster resilience, and his leadership and determination in building back after Hurricane Beryl is a testament to him and his country's resilience. And the floor is now yours, Prime Minister.
Thank you. President of Azerbaijan, COP President, UN Secretary General, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, distinguished heads of state and government, esteemed delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First, I want to start by thanking the President, government, and people of Azerbaijan for the tremendous warmth, hospitality, and excellent arrangements made in supporting SIDS at this COP29. The support of Azerbaijan has ensured that many of the SIDS nations are here today. and we therefore put on record our sincere appreciation and gratitude for the support in making this COP accessible to SIDS. In US television shows, there are good cops and bad cops. From SIDS' perspective, we want to ensure that this is a good COP. The reality is that the Caribbean community, CARICOM, which I chair currently, like our colleague SID nations, are on the front line of this existential threat to our way of life. As I speak at this very moment, Grenada and many of the islands in the Southern Caribbean are dealing with the onslaught of massive flooding, which occurred overnight. In the case of Grenada, we have faced, in 11 months, a record 15-year drought, followed by a Category 5 hurricane, now followed by flooding, landslides, all in the midst of trying to continue with achieving our sustainable development goals. So when small island developing states speak of the challenge of financing the mitigation and adaptation that we face as a result of the climate crisis and the significant gap in financing that exists, it is easy to take this for granted. But the empirical data shows that SIDS have repaid in debt financing 18 times more than they have received in climate finance. Let me repeat that. SIDS have paid in debt repayments 18 times more than they have received in climate financing. And so without setting any new ambitions or targets, the starting point for credibility is to close that financing gap. And the debt we pay to be able to survive is a debt that is unsustainable, not only in financial terms, but in livelihoods, in lives, and the very civilization of the people who live in small island developing states. And so the partnership that has to be actualized is one that requires us to speak in ordinary language. The average citizen of SIDS don't care to hear about words like operationalize the loss and fund damage. They want to hear that the loss and damage fund has money in it, that the money is accessible, that the loss and damage fund is for SIDS, that it's located in a SIDS nation, that it's controlled by the SIDS nation, and that it is to be used for compensation for the actual loss and damage we suffer year in, year out. Not a loan, not a discretionary grant, but an obligation that has arisen as a result of the loss and damage we are suffering from the actions of others. And that is the partnership that SIDS seek, and that is the partnership that we are here at this good COP29 to achieve. So I want to emphasize that SIDS are already doing all that they can do to build financial resilience. Most SIDS are already pursuing a multi-layered financial resilience strategy to respond to the climatic challenge. We are paying for the parametric insurance. We are setting aside contingency funds. We are building savings into our national budgets. We have insisted on debt suspension clauses so that we can divert funds away from debt repayment and into emergency responses. But those measures on their own is simply not enough to allow SIDS to cope with the enormous challenge posed by the negative impacts of the climate crisis. So the partnership that we are seeking is a partnership that not only benefits SIDS, but in fact will benefit those who are responsible for this crisis. Because make no mistake, human beings will always seek a better life. And if the consequences of the climate challenge is the threat to our way of life, our people will move. They will seek a better life. And so the refugees that we have from man-made war and destruction will also become the refugees from the climate destruction. So we can find trillions to fight wars. We can find the trillions to solve the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for underscoring that SIDS pay back 18 times more than they borrow, and that this has to be changed, and we must find the money to support our members so that they can not only survive, but thrive. Can we thank all the members of this panel, remarkable leaders on the front line, delivering for their member states. We now turn to our third and last panel, and I'm going to invite all the panel to come, but we are very conscious that we are running short of time. So can I ask each of the following speakers as they come to the podium, please, to shorten your statements so we can have short, pithy statements which will get us back on track. Can I please invite His Excellency Philip Davis, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, His Excellency Mark Brown, the Prime Minister of Cook Islands, His Excellency the Honourable Prasad, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance of Fiji, Her Excellency Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, Her Excellency Mafalda Durati, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, and His Excellency Ibrahim Sheikh Diong, who is the Executive Director of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. If they could all join us, I'd be very grateful. I'm glad that the first one to join us is my dear brother and friend, Philip Davis.
Thank you very much. Accepting the protocol that has been established, I start by pointing out I start by pointing out that our people do have the right to survival. They have a right to pass down to future generations a world better than the one they inherited. And yet, this most basic right, this right to life, to hope, to continuity, hangs by a thread. In this hour of crisis, it seems some would choose isolation over unity, self-interest over collective action. But we, the nations most at risk, do not have the luxury to retreat. The moment demands courage, vision, and a shared commitment to hold hands and confront together the fierce challenges that lie before us. The evidence is stark. This year alone, we have witnessed heat waves, droughts, floods, hurricanes, and fires, each event a part of a global pattern. Yet still, there are those who look at these signs as if they are isolated moments, coincidences of bad weather, rather than the planet's unmistakable call for action. These are not mere coincidences of nature. They are warnings, the Earth's way of showing us the high cost of inaction. Every storm, every fire, every flood cries out that time is running out, and yet some choose to look the other way. The disasters are not the product of fate, but of choices. Colleagues, I ask you, as I ask myself, what kind of legacy do we wish to leave? Will it be one of solutions or of regret? The path forward is not complicated. It is simply inconvenient for some. The next round of nationally determined contributions in 2025 is a moment that cannot be wasted. Current commitments are insufficient to keep us within a 1.5 degrees Celsius future. They will instead lead us to a world well beyond 2 degrees Celsius, a world in which SIDS may no longer exist. Mitigation efforts in SIDS will not shift global emissions. They hold immense value, but they hold immense value for us. The implications for our economies, our people, and our ecosystems are severe. Hard-won development gains are being undermined as schools, hospitals, housing, roads, and bridges, much of which is constructed with significant multilateral loans, are destroyed before they are even fully paid for. The costs of these catastrophes are growing exponentially and diverting resources away from investment in long-term sustainable development. We are confronting the stark injustices of a crisis we did not create, a crisis we cannot avert on our own, even if we do everything we can to limit emissions. Most CARICOM member states lack the fiscal space to mobilize the resources needed to recover from worsening impacts of climate change. How can we close the recovery financing gap when a single hurricane can cause damage that amounts to multiples of GDP, as we have seen happen in our region? Access to concessional financing remains out of reach for many of our countries because of outdated eligibility rules based on GDP per capita. Even as we have reached agreement at the United Nations on a multi-dimensional vulnerability index, we have yet to see international financial institutions commit to its use. Grants for adaptation take too long to access and are insufficient to meet the scale of our climate-resilient development needs. We implore bilateral and multilateral partners to scale up resources for adaptation and loss and damage, and to ensure that SIDS can access these funds at scale, quickly, without excessive and costly bureaucracy, and in the form of grants. Justice demands this. It is unconscionable that small island developing states should bear the brunt of a crisis climate that we did not and are not contributing to. As I was reminded by my chairman of CARICOM, Prime Minister Mitchell of Grenada, SIDS have spent 18 times more in debt repayments than they have received in climate finance. The annual cost of damages from disasters is equal to an average of up to 8% of the entire GDP of SIDS, without considering the growing need for adaptation or the mounting toll of loss and damage. Justice demands that the polluters should pay, not those who bear the burden of the pollution. Adaptation funding must be prioritized. I will call for 70% of climate finance to be directed to adaptation for SIDS. This is not a request, but a necessity. Adaptation is our right to prepare and to protect. Furthermore, the loss and damage fund must become a tool of immediate relief, not a maze of red tape. Bureaucratic delay is an injustice to every community left exposed and unprepared. We do not seek favors, we seek fairness. If we are to bear the consequences of a crisis we did not cause, then at the very least, we must have the support necessary to face it. Excellencies, this is our moment. We are faced with a choice: to act with boldness and unity, or to let fear and inertia decide our fate. Let us not be remembered as those who turned away in the hour of need, but as those who came together, who held hands across borders, and who fought for a world that honors the right to survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Davis. We understand the pain which was inflicted on the Bahamas as a result of Hurricane Dorian. We commend you for your resilience and echo your call for justice, scale, speed, and equity for those who've suffered. I now turn to Prime Minister Mark Brown from the Cook Islands, who has championed the Pacific Partnership for Prosperity to support and deliver on the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. And I invite you to make your statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I will take your instruction and try to make my comments reduced and pithy, I think was the word we used. I'd like to firstly acknowledge President Aliyev of Azerbaijan, our host country. Also acknowledge our COP29 President Babayev for their generous support in allowing SIDS countries to participate fully at this COP meeting. Honourable leaders, kia ora to you all. At the COP26 in Glasgow, the parties committed to at least double adaptation finance from $19 billion per year by 2025. However, UNEP's latest adaptation gap report shows that while progress has been made, much of it is through non-concessional loans rather than grants or highly concessional financing. This is a critical issue for us, as the adaptation finance gap is estimated to be between around $40 billion annually for SIDS. Because of the scale and small size of SIDS economies, our costs are disproportionately high. SIDS need nearly double the financing of other developing nations as a percentage of their GDP. For SIDS like the Cook Islands, over 50% of climate finance needs are focused on adaptation. And let me be a bit clear, adaptation to us is protection, so we need money for protection. Meeting this demand is crucial, and we must ensure that the new collective quantified goals address these specific needs with an adjustable mechanism to reassess and increase the quantum as climate impacts escalate. This highlights the urgency for loss and damage mechanisms to be operationalized effectively. We welcome the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, soon to be operationalized. However, this fund must be capitalized at a scale sufficient to meet our needs, with estimates suggesting that future needs may reach trillions. Ensuring an adequate level of funding is critical for addressing escalating climate-related losses. Given our high vulnerability and special circumstances, SIDS require a guaranteed minimum allocation from the Loss and Damage Fund, ideally in the range of 50%, to ensure our loss and damage needs are prioritized. In conclusion, we are here in beautiful Azerbaijan to set the scene for a longer-term goal at home, and our home is on the other side of the planet. But it's to set the goal for our people, our environment, that intergenerationally know that addressing climate change now builds the capital into the future for our resilience, and I look forward to amplifying our SIDS voice with and through the SIDS Declaration. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Brown, but also thank you for reinforcing the position of SIDS in the Pacific. And we now turn to Fiji, and we invite the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, the Honourable Professor Prasad, to make his intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General, Excellencies, fellow ministers and fellow SIDS leaders. At the outset, I would like to thank the COP29 presidency for convening this event and supporting the voices of SIDS. The voice of IOSIS and the experience of SIDS remains the backdrop of the narrative of ambition. We are the guardians of the 1.5-degree temperature goal, and indeed the establishing force behind the target. And while we may be on the front line of the climate crisis, the first to feel the burn and the most insignificant contributors to the climate emergency, our interests are far from rooted in pure self-interest. And our interests differ from many, as our interests constitute the only formulation of priorities and objectives that in reality benefit all. Interests that perpetuate uneven benefits as well as enable and permit direct damage to other parties as well as themselves cannot be translated into shared interests. Keeping global average temperature rise below 1.5 degrees is a shared and common objective, but across the parties, the drive to take responsibility for delivering it differs drastically. For over 2 decades, we have allowed incrementalism to subsume our agendas. This strategy, I'm afraid, has kept very specific industries cushioned, very specific power structures intact, but cost the world trillions in damage, wreaked havoc on the world's poorest, stripped much of the biodiversity from the face of the Earth planet, and locked in impacts that will threaten our stability for decades. The shadow cost of carbon is so great, the economic rationale so flawed, the short-termism so apparent, the effort to keep fossil fuels in play, despite a myriad of viable alternatives so overt, that it is very difficult not to see the rhetoric we are so used to hearing as a smokescreen. So SIDS must be clear. For the record, for the global majority, who have, whether they like it or not, put all their eggs in one basket. That we will not engage in a race to the bottom, especially if it is being twisted to be portrayed as a race to the top. The question we have before us now is, do we want more? Do we want to push our societies to the limits of the resilience in the hope of some sort of wizardry in 2030, or do we want real change? Contrary to the views of some SIDS, or contrary to the views of some, SIDS are not idealists. We are not idealists. We are realists. We are pragmatists. We ingest the science. We see the issues in their immediate form. And therefore, as SIDS, and I must say on behalf of Fiji, let me be very clear. COP29 needs to raise the bar, lock in the basis for Paris and 1.5-degree aligned 2025 NDCs, and secure the new collective quantified goal on finance, which is evidence-based and recognizes our special circumstances. We need to ensure that all our partners are sighted on transformation rather than incrementalism, on hope rather than harm. Excellencies, this is our task. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, particularly in relation to the role I know you play as Finance Minister. And just to underline the importance between debt and our ability to deliver on adaptation and mitigation, it's right for us just to note that in the Commonwealth alone, our Meridian initiative currently manages $4.5 trillion of debt. And there is a direct correlation between that heavy burden of debt and that which has been occasioned by climate disasters. So we now turn to the agencies who have assisted us in delivering that change. And I turn first to Dr. Carla Barnett, as Secretary General of CARICOM, who leads the regional effort on sustainable development, climate resilience, and integration. As a regional stakeholder, I want to ask Secretary General Barnett what she believes the role of technology, particularly given the recent developments in AI, for enhanced climate action are. So over to you, Secretary General, my dear sister.
It's not staying. This one? Okay. Thank you very much, Secretary General, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. As we have been hearing, and I repeat for emphasis, SIDS, including CARICOM states and the wider Caribbean, are at the front lines of the climate change crisis. CARICOM states and all SIDS continue to bear the brunt of global climate change that we do not cause. Altogether, SIDS are responsible for less than 1% of global carbon emissions. SIDS' ongoing climate change challenges are unprecedented. Extreme heat, extreme weather, sea level rise, warming ocean temperatures are all creating a perfect storm that can reverse all our gains suddenly or progressively because of their cascading and compounding impacts. I have been asked to say a bit about what AI brings to this unprecedented set of crises. AI is rapidly being deployed to tackle the climate crisis on multiple fronts. It's enhancing our ability to predict and prepare for extreme weather events like hurricanes, wildfires, by analyzing massive climate data sets. AI can help monitor and protect ecosystems by tracking things like shoreline change, loss of territory, and deforestation with unprecedented speed and accuracy. AI accelerates climate research by analyzing complex data, making timely analyses and policy development possible at levels previously unattainable. However, it is crucial to develop and use AI responsibly. We know the mischief that AI can be programmed to do. We have already been fighting misinformation and climate skepticism. A strategy to counter this climate misinformation may be timely. There are also emerging discussions of the carbon footprint and sustainability elements of AI and supercomputing that will need to be addressed. Within CARICOM, we have been developing our ICT for Development policy and program, including the creation of a regional AI policy to consider its role in sustainability and climate action. But the riddle that has to be solved with a much greater sense of urgency is the access to finance on affordable and appropriate terms to make it possible to do all we need to do to build resilience to climate change, including deployment of AI. What is true is that the longer the G20, who are responsible for 80% of global emissions, the longer they take to reduce these emissions that are at the core of the climate crisis, the larger the amount of funding necessary to address the impact of climate change on all of us. But especially SIDS, who, as I said, are responsible for less than 1% of emissions. And SIDS need real finance. We welcome the commitment made at COP26 to double climate adaptation finance by 2025. But we have to underscore the importance of its materialization and operationalization. Same can be said for the Loss and Damage Fund. We urge that the board, together with the newly appointed ED, move swiftly to put in place the necessary arrangements to ensure the fund is fit for purpose for SIDS and can deploy resources as soon as 2025. Resources are urgently necessary, simply and directly, in amounts commensurate with actual needs. We already know there's a significant finance gap for keeping global warming below 1.5. Further, SIDS receive only 2% of the global public finance, which is not even evenly spread across SIDS. The picture worsens when considering the debt of SIDS. According to the World Bank, over a third of SIDS have relatively high public debt ratios, with 14 being assessed as high risk for sovereign debt distress. Not only are we paying for the climate crisis, we are also committing future generations to debt because of lack of international support. So this COP must deliver a finance climate goal that is credible and consequential for 1.5. SIDS do not have the luxury of time. We must ensure that we solve the problem of access to resources to address our vulnerabilities. We cannot ease up on our insistence that those countries responsible for the emissions that cause climate change take effective action to reduce their emissions. And as we move ahead, we ask the UN system to evaluate the effectiveness of this process and whether it is delivering to those of us who are on the front lines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barnett, and we now move seamlessly to those who are most able to assist us in terms of understanding how we get scale and speed when it comes to finance. Ms. Mafalda Durate is the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, where she leads efforts to mobilize and distribute climate finance to support developing nations in their climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. With changing times and increasing need for climate finance, how is the GCF gearing up to meet the increasing gap for climate finance, particularly bearing in mind what we've heard today, that SIDS are paying back 18 times more than they are being given for climate finance, and that they are currently drowning in debt. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Patricia. Let me start by thanking the authorities of Azerbaijan, COP29 President, and the people of Azerbaijan for hosting this beautiful COP in this beautiful country. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank SIDS. You have been doing a service to us all, not just to your nations, by championing ambitious climate action. We know, and the science keeps telling us consistently, that the expected impacts will be worse than foreseen before. We know that last year GHG emissions increased by 1.3%, which is higher average than in the last decade, and this should be quite concerning to us all. Let me say that SIDS are a priority for the Green Climate Fund. Let me say, and the way to demonstrate this is to say that as a total share of the resources that we have committed, around $16 billion, more than 10% have been committed to SIDS. That's 4 times more than other financial institutions. And Secretary General Carla just mentioned the number. On average, SIDS receive 2%. It's not just about quantum, it's also about quality. 65% of our financing to SIDS is grant-based. And we don't distinguish in terms of income level. The funding that we provide is based on the assessment of the needs. Of course, at a time we know that debt distress is an increasing concern. This is really important. Let me also say that we are working for the first time with many national and regional entities serving the interests of SIDS. Examples like the Development Bank of Jamaica or Fiji, the recently accredited Bank of Cook Islands, but also we are helping establish new entities like the Blue-Green Bank of Barbados. We have also been the largest providers of funding for strengthening institutions, strengthening NAPs, NDCs, or even developing them for the first time. We have provided more than 1/3 of our $600 million in the readiness program to SIDS. And also, speaking of debt, we have approved at our recent board meetings our first Debt for Climate swap project in Barbados, which we hope to be able to replicate elsewhere. Of course, this is all a drop in the ocean of needs, and this is also the reason why we have defined a vision of ambition of delivering $50 billion by 2030. Again, it's not just about quantum, it's about quality. So we've heard your call on simplification of access, and we are taking measures to reduce the times that it takes for projects to be approved and also for money to reach your countries and communities. One other word on complementarity and coherence. We have been proud to be part of the interim secretariat to establish the Loss and Damage Fund, jointly with UNFCCC and UNDP. We continue to support them, we will continue to support them, and very much look forward to joining hands with others, with the other funds and the MDBs and other IFIs in serving you in the way that you need, you deserve. It's unacceptable, and it should be unacceptable to us all what is happening in your countries. Thank you.
Can I take this opportunity on behalf of all of us to thank Mafalda for her trenchant work. I think all of us have felt the passion and the frustration, and just to reassure her that we are with her as we urge her to fly higher, further, and to gather more money. We now turn to our next speaker, who is, of course, Ibrahima Sheikh Diong, who is the Executive Director for the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and we await his words with joyful anticipation and no dread at all. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Secretary General, for the teaser about the anticipation sense of urgency, which I've heard since I landed in Baku about the expectation from the fund that I have the privilege of being Executive Director. Let me begin by recognizing the tremendous efforts that the SIDS countries have undertaken for decades to make this fund a reality. And I'd like to pause for a second and give a big round of applause for the work they've done to bring us here. You've demonstrated what we can achieve in the name of global solidarity, consistency, but more importantly, dedication, and we are what we are thanks to your hard work. I want to recognize the leadership of the COP29 presidency. You may have noticed today, over and over, the word FRRD has been mentioned, and you made sure it is indeed on the table in all the conversation that we had, but also underscore the sense of urgency, because it's an area that affects the life of many people in the open world, in the city in particular. While we're making all this progress, unfortunately, extreme weather conditions are getting worse, not better, affecting the lives of millions of people in developing countries, and SIDS included. And that itself should also determine why we need to underscore the importance of rapid response so we can bring the solutions that can actually improve the lives of many people who are affected by extreme weather conditions. It is also thanks to the leadership of Azerbaijan on COP29 presidency, we began to get actually some new pledges made here in Baku. To address the question that many have raised in the past intervention, let me make 2 points. One is the commitment of the board in addressing your concerns, and then second, the commitment that I am prepared to make here as Executive Director to be part of the solution. Number one, you know by now we have the pledge of $700 million, and as of yesterday we got about $720 million. We need to move swiftly in making sure we turn those pledges into actual funding, and that is an effort that needs to be done very quickly so we can have resources that we can begin actually to make the funding requires in the SIDS and other countries as well. I think second, it's been said by many people who spoke before me, the needs to address loss and damage is in the billions. Why we appreciate and the support being provided so far in the billions that I just mentioned, in the millions, it is important that we need to capitalize the fund as quickly as possible in anticipation of the demand we've seen in all the developing countries. And I have no doubt under your leadership and your support and your advocacy, will continue to make the case why the capitalization needs to happen and happen swiftly. Third, the board of the fund is extremely committed at making sure that we come up with the access modalities as quickly as possible and making access easy, nimble, and flexible and fair to make sure at least we can begin to address the needs of the country we're supposed to be supporting. And that will take into account the lessons learned for previous funds, but more importantly, building on what Mafalda has said earlier, and complementarity and coordination, and make sure we can actually speed up access for the countries who actually need the funding. Forward, the fund also is acknowledging the importance of building actually ownership in our response in the countries we're supposed to support. So we're looking forward also in building the capacities to make sure the accessibility is easier. But more importantly, we're also looking at the ways in which in developing national loss and damage strategies and plan, whereby our intervention is fully aligned with the policies, the commitment, and the vision of the country we're supposed to support, so at least we can come up with sustainable solutions. Last but not least, the fund also recognizes we're not actually alone in addressing loss and damage. And that is why my colleague to my right, Mafalda, and I have decided to join forces to making sure as we engage with countries, we pull our resources together so we can actually be part of the solutions. Let me finish by saying what I'm prepared to do as executive directors. I may be on the job only for 1 week, and that is probably too early to make any commitment or statement, but I can tell you this. I came from Senegal in West Africa. I grew up seeing women being challenged, like having access to water. I grew up seeing poverty in the countries where I came from. I am absolutely mindful that what we do has a human face, and everything that we do should be geared about making a difference in the lives of people who are affected every single day by drought, tropical cyclone, and flood, and that's what motivates me as executive director, and making sure that we provide the support needed and provide them swiftly so that we can be part of the solutions. Second, as executive director, I know for us to be successful, we have to be transparent, we have to be inclusive, we have to listen. And I'm prepared as executive director in listening to all the countries that are affected by climate change and making sure we can actually tailor-make those response in supporting the countries. Last but not least, our board, under their leadership, believe that the only way we can be successful by using at the bottom-up approach so that we can be part of the solution and be demand-driven and not supply-driven. And I hope by COP30 in Brazil, the conversation that we'll be having together, it's not about just being 1 week on the job, it's about how much impact we've had so we can save the life and livelihood of many people who are depending on us to deliver. Thank you very much.
Will be willing you to succeed and will be walking with you in partnership. Excellencies, we are now drawing to a close, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all our speakers, but in addition, to thank the Presidency in particular. From a Commonwealth point of view, we thank them for their MOU with the Commonwealth Secretariat, for the commitment they've made for $10 million towards the technical fund for SIDS within the Commonwealth, and also for the MOU with Cosmos for their satellite data to enable us to go further and to scale up the speed and nature of our climate finance claims. But we now come to an end, and we know, Excellencies, that we've heard the ambition for this COP29, which, as the Prime Minister of Grenada described it, needs to be a good COP and not a bad COP. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the man who will facilitate the delivery of our goals. Mr. Yalchin Rafiev, the COP29 chief negotiator, and I hand over to you, sir, to close today's discussions, but know you go with our love, our affection, our determination, that you will deliver everything that we have discussed today in a way that will be able to mark this COP as the COP which finally not only spoke but actually delivered action which was meaningful. And we thank you in advance for everything you will achieve on behalf of us all. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary General, and thank you for your and Commonwealth Secretariat's consistent support to the COP29 presidency. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to thank you all for your active participation and the insightful conversations we had during today's deliberations. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to all the speakers and contributors today. We are delighted to have hosted this Leaders' Summit of the Small Island Developing States on climate change, along with Samoa, Chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, Grenada, Chair of the Caribbean Community, and Tonga, Chair of the Pacific Islands Forum. Small island states are at the front lines of the climate change. The island communities have been facing the disproportionate impacts of climate change while contributing less than 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions globally. We recognize that small islands are particularly vulnerable to climate change because of their unique circumstances, their remoteness, and high vulnerabilities. We are halfway through the critical decade of keeping the 1.5 degree alive, and this goal is extremely important for small island developing states. The IPCC has already warned that overshooting 1.5 degree will put more than 70% of the coral reefs at risk of severe degradation, including coral bleaching. SIDS are sometimes referred to as large ocean states, and their economy and livelihood are heavily dependent on the ocean. Climate change not only expedites the environmental destruction, but it also encroaches on the development gains enjoyed by SIDS, thereby hindering the speed with which they are able to meet the sustainable development goals. Furthermore, in order to deal with the climate change, we have heard loud and clear that SIDS need urgent adaptation interventions, which are costly and need concessional financing. In the context of constrained fiscal spaces, this sets back SIDS aspirations for their development and their ability to strengthen resilience. And while they face several challenges to strengthen their resilience, climate impacts keep on increasing, and the SIDS are in the territory of having to address loss and damage at more frequent intervals. For us, it is imperative that as COP29 presidency, we do all we can to increase ambition and climate action to alleviate this impact. As you have heard today, climate finance is absolutely critical for SIDS survival in this existential threat. We seek to reach a fair and ambitious outcome on the NCQG at COP29. Yesterday, the COP29 presidency hosted an event where new institutional documents of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage were signed. These signings of institutional documents mark a historic milestone on the journey to providing funding for losses and damages to countries in need. At the same time, we also need to work on our collective capacities and identify and facilitate the exchange of technology to cope with the new realities. In line with the theme for this year's COP, in solidarity for a green world, we must stand together as a global community to ensure that 1.5 goal is achievable, and for this, collectively advocate for ambitious action that leaves no one behind. We hope that today's discussion on addressing critical adaptation and mitigation and loss and damage needs of SIDS lead to constructive and collaborative efforts to collectively build SIDS' future in the context of climate change. We commit to making sure that your priorities are at the heart of the work we are doing in these weeks and to support you all the way. Distinguished guests, I'm pleased to inform you that today Azerbaijan as a COP29 presidency and the government of the independent state of Samoa acting as the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States adopt Baku Declaration on amplifying SIDS' voice at COP29 for a resilient and sustainable future as an outcome of this Leaders' Summit. The Baku Declaration contains a call to the international community to enhance support for SIDS countries in their efforts to tackle the adverse effects of the climate change. Dear colleagues, on behalf of the COP29 presidency, rest assured that you can continue to count on our full support throughout this process, every step of the way. This year's COP is not just about negotiations, it's about action. It is about enhancing our ambition and enabling real, tangible action. It is clear that only through collaboration and collective action can we overcome the immense challenges ahead. We must act with urgency and in solidarity to build a green, resilient, and sustainable future. Thank you all once again for your participation.
Want to add my thanks to all the magnificent speakers, the leaders, particularly the COP presidency, for allowing us this opportunity to concentrate on the needs of our small island developing states who are right at the heart of the storm which has become the climate crisis, and to hope that each and every one of us will contribute to the partnership which will build the resilience and the funds that we will need to keep our world safe. And I thank everyone who has attended this absolutely critical panel today. Thank you.